The wind was cold that night, sweeping across the empty streets of the small human colony. Lights from the windows were dim, and most people were inside, warm and safe. But out in the shadows, a dog walked slowly, its paws dragging through the dust. Its fur was matted, its ribs showed under the skin, and one ear hung low from an old injury. No one knew where it had come from, or when it had arrived in the colony. Some said it was born wild, others thought it had belonged to travelers who left long ago. Whatever the truth, no one wanted it, and no one called it by a name. The children sometimes threw scraps at it, but most of the time people just turned away. It was to them just another stray, another problem no one had time for that night. The dog wandered beyond the edge of the colony. It sniffed at the ground, searching for something to eat. The hills were dark ahead, the stars above sharp and bright. The wind carried strange smells, dry dust, cold rock, and something else. A faint sound drifted to its ears. It froze, ears twitching. The sound came again, soft, trembling cries, not human, not like any animal it knew. The dog lifted its head, listening. Its paws moved before it even decided to go. Something in those cries pulled it forward. It trotted across the dirt, then climbed the rocky path into the hills. The sound grew clearer, a high, pitiful whimper. It smelled fear, fresh and sharp. When it reached the ridge, it stopped, below. In a small hollow between the rocks, 3 tiny shapes huddled together. At first, the dog thought they were strange birds, but then it saw their scales glimmering faintly in the starlight. Their wings were folded tight against their small bodies, their eyes wide and wet. They were not from Earth, they were alien creatures. The dog had never seen such beings, but somehow it knew they were very young. Their cries were weak and their bodies trembled with cold. They could barely lift their heads. The dog stood still, watching them, its breath forming soft clouds in the cold air. Above them, a shadow moved. The dog's eyes darted upward. Something circled in the night sky, a predator, its wings broad and silent. It swooped lower, its eyes fixed on the helpless babies. The dog's muscles tensed. It didn't think. It didn't plan. It leapt forward, barking loud and sharp. The predator veered away, startled, disappearing into the darkness. The 3 alien babies flinched but did not run. They stared at the dog, unsure. One made a faint chirping sound. Almost like a question, the dog took a cautious step closer, sniffing the air. The smell of them was strange, metallic, smoky, and warm. Yet there was something fragile about it. Something that made the dog's chest tighten. It glanced around. The hollow was too open. Too dangerous. If that predator came back, or if others smelled them, they would not survive. The dog's mind, simple but sharp, made a decision. It stepped into the hollow, its body blocking the wind. The baby shuffled closer, pressing against its legs. Their scales were cold to the touch. The dog lay down slowly, curling its body around them. Its warmth spread, and their shivering began to fade. For the first time in days, the dog felt the weight of purpose. These small lives needed it, and it would not leave them. In the colony, no one noticed that the stray had not returned. The streets were silent, the doors closed. Out in the hills, under the alien stars, the dog kept watch. Its ears stayed alert for the sound of wings or footsteps. The babies slept fitfully, making soft rumbling noises in their throats. Once or twice, one lifted its head to look at the dog before curling back into its warmth. The night grew colder, the wind sharper, but the dog did not move. It had been alone for as long as it could remember. But tonight, for reasons it could not understand, it was not alone anymore. It was guarding something precious, something worth fighting for, far away, in the darkness beyond the hills. Other sounds stirred, heavy footsteps, low growls, and the shifting of stone. Something else was out there, moving closer. The dog's ears twitched, and it lifted its head, staring into the shadows. It did not know what was coming, but it knew one thing for certain. It would not let anything harm the tiny lives pressed against its side. The cold night stretched on. The stars wheeled overhead, and the dog waited, ready for whatever came next. The first light of dawn touched the rocky hills, turning the edges of the stones pale gold. The dog was still awake, lying in the hollow, with the 3 alien babies curled close against its belly. Their small bodies gave off a strange, faint heat, and their breathing was soft and uneven. The dog could feel their hearts beating fast, as if they were still afraid even in sleep. A dry rustle in the rocks made the dog's head snap up. It scanned the slopes. Ears pricked. A small lizard darted past, harmless, but it reminded the dog that danger could come quietly. The dog licked the nearest baby's head, unsure why, but feeling it was the right thing to do. The little one made a chirp and shifted closer. The others followed, their tiny claws catching slightly in the dog's fur. The dog's stomach growled. It had not eaten since the day before. The babies, too, seemed weak with hunger, their eyes dull. The dog knew it needed to find food, but leaving them alone was not safe. It stood, looked around, and then barked softly. The babies tilted their heads, watching. The dog took a few steps toward the path leading down to the lower rocks, then turned back. The babies hesitated, then began to follow, stumbling and sliding on the uneven ground. The air was still cold, but the sun was rising higher. The dog led them toward a place it knew, a shallow pool where rainwater sometimes collected. It could smell water there now, faint but real. When they reached the pool, the dog lowered its head and drank deeply. The babies sniffed at the water before lapping at it with awkward movements. Their reflections shimmered in the surface, tiny dragon faces with curious eyes. The dog stood guard, every muscle tense. Scanning the horizon, suddenly, a shadow swept across the pool. The dog's head jerked up, heart pounding. It was the predator from last night, gliding lower. Its wings stretched wide. The baby squealed and crowded behind the dog, the predator's yellow eyes fixed on them. The dog bared its teeth and barked loud and sharp. The sound echoed off the rocks and the predator hesitated. It circled once more, then drifted away, disappearing behind the ridge. The dog kept staring after it until the sky was empty again. The babies were still trembling. The dog sniffed them, pressing its head gently against each one. They made soft clicking sounds, like they were talking to each other. Then one of them stepped forward, reaching out a small claw to touch the dog's paw. The dog blinked, unsure what this meant. But something warm spread through its chest. It understood now. They trusted it, and trust meant it could not fail them. By midday, the heat was stronger. The dog found a patch of shade under a ledge and guided the babies there. It lay down, letting them curl up again. One of them yawned, showing tiny sharp teeth. Another stretched its small wings, the membranes thin and glowing faintly in the light. The dog rested its head on its paws, watching them with tired but alert eyes. It still had no plan, but it knew it would have to keep moving before night came. Predators were one danger, hunger and cold were another. Far away, a faint sound reached the dog's ears. Not the cry of animals, not the whisper of the wind. This was heavier. Slower, the babies heard it too, lifting their heads. The sound came again, footsteps, crunching over stone. The dog rose, its fur standing on end. It stepped forward, blocking the babies from view. From behind the rocks, a figure appeared. It was tall, two-legged, wrapped in dust-stained clothes, a human. The human stopped when he saw the dog. His eyes shifted to the shapes behind it. The dog growled low, its body rigid. The man raised his hands slowly, showing they were empty. "I'm not here to hurt them," he said in a low voice. The dog didn't understand the words, but it understood the tone. Calm, careful. The man took a step forward, then crouched, keeping his gaze steady on the dog. The babies peered out from behind their guardian, their eyes bright with curiosity. The man's gaze softened. "Dragonlings," he whispered to himself. He looked at the dog again, as if surprised. "You're protecting them," he said quietly. The dog stood its ground, not moving, somewhere deep inside. It knew this moment mattered. If it let this human close, things would change. But if it drove him away, it might lose the only chance to help the babies survive. The wind shifted, carrying the man's scent, human, but mixed with the sharp tang of metal. The dog's ears twitched. The babies made a soft sound, not fearful this time, but almost like they were calling. The dog glanced back at them, then forward at the man. The hollow space between them was small, but heavy with choice, and in that moment, the dog decided it would not run. It would see what this human wanted, but it would never stop protecting the 3 small lives it had found. His time in a tone the dog had not heard before, happy, relieved. The man lowered his makeshift weapon, his face showing understanding. "They're not just hatchlings," he said quietly. "They're its children." The dog glanced between the giant dragon and the babies. For the first time since the night began, it felt the tight knot of fear in its chest loosen. But the moment was cut short by the sound of engines in the distance. The man's head snapped toward the noise. "They're coming," he said sharply. He looked at the dog, at the babies, and at the massive parent dragon. "We need to move. All of us." The sound of engines grew louder, rumbling through the night air like an oncoming storm. The massive dragon parent lifted its head, eyes narrowing toward the distant glow on the horizon. The human's jaw tightened, his hands already moving. To pack what little he had, the dog stood tense, its body pressed protectively against the 3 small dragons. The hatchlings were chirping softly, sensing the danger but not fully understanding it. A faint red light began to sweep over the rocks outside. The human's voice was low and urgent. "They have search drones," he said, glancing at the dragon. "Parent." The dragon's wings twitched, its tail curling around the hatchlings. The man looked at the dog. "We can't outrun them on foot, but maybe we don't have to." The engines roared closer, and the sharp hiss of air brakes followed. The dog's ears flicked toward the sound. Shadows shifted at the edge of the ruined station. Tall figures in armored suits, their visors glowing faint green, hunters, each carried a weapon, and their movements were slow but sure, like predators who knew the prey had nowhere to run. Parent Dragon let out a warning growl that made the ground tremble. The hunters stopped for a moment, reassessing. One of them raised a hand and barked an order. From behind them came a hovering cage, suspended by a drone, the bars glowing faintly with energy. It was built for capture, not for killing. The dog bared its teeth and growled, its fur standing on end. It knew instinctively that if the hatchlings were taken, they would never be free again. The human moved quickly, his mind racing. He pulled a small black device from his pack and handed it to the dog. "Get this near their transport," he whispered. The dog didn't understand the words, but it understood the urgency in his voice. Without hesitation, it took the device gently in its mouth. The man then turned to the dragon parent, speaking quickly in a low tone. Somehow the giant seemed to understand. The parent dragon suddenly unfurled its wings, releasing a blast of hot air into the night. Dust and debris swirled, clouding the hunter's vision. In that moment, the dog bolted, slipping through the wreckage, keeping low to the ground. It raced past the first line of hunters, their boots crunching just a few feet away. The smell of metal and heated armor was strong. The dog kept running until it reached the flatbed hovercraft the hunters had arrived in. It ducked under the side, heart pounding, and placed the device on the craft's power core. The moment it let go, a faint blue light began to blink on the device. The dog spun and ran back, weaving between rocks. A beam of light swept past, just missing it. A blaster shot followed, scorching the ground where it had been a second earlier. The hunters were shouting now, some running toward the hovercraft. The dog reached the ruined station just as the human grabbed the hatchlings and motioned toward the dragon's back. "Up," he said sharply. The dog hesitated, then leapt up after the babies. Landing against the warm scales, the human climbed up next, gripping one of the dragon's ridges for balance. The parent dragon turned, its wings rising high. A moment later, a deep, rolling explosion shook the ground. The hunter's transport erupted in a ball of blue-white fire. The blast threw some of the hunters to the ground, their suits sparking. The dragon beat its wings once, twice, and then they were airborne. The ruined station dropped away beneath them, the shouts of the hunters fading into the night. The dog felt the wind tearing past its face, its ears flat against its head. The hatchlings pressed into its side, their small bodies warm and trembling. The human was shouting something to the dragon, pointing toward the horizon. Below them, the dark hills stretched endlessly, broken only by silver rivers of moonlight. But behind them, faint lights still moved. The hunters had more ships, and they were already in pursuit. The dragon banked sharply, heading toward a narrow gorge ahead. The human leaned close to the dog's ear, his voice carried away by the wind, but his meaning clear. This isn't over. The dog glanced back. In the distance, the glowing hunter ships were closing in, their engines bright against the black sky. The dragon pushed harder, the air rushing faster. Somewhere deep in the gorge, safety might be waiting, or another trap. The dog didn't know what was ahead. All it knew was that the hatchlings were still with it, and it would fight until its last breath to keep them that way. The night was far from quiet now. It was alive with the sound of wings, engines, and the steady beat of hearts that refused to give up. The wind howled as the parent dragon dove into the gorge. The walls rose high on both sides, jagged and close enough that the dragon's wingtips almost brushed them. Below, a thin silver river wound through the dark, glinting in the moonlight. The dog clung to the dragon's scales, pressing the hatchlings tight against its side. The human held on with one arm while scanning the sky behind them. The hunter ships followed, their lights flashing, their engines screaming through the narrow space. A sharp beam of red light cut past the dragon's wing. The parent roared in anger and twisted sharply. Avoiding the shot, rocks splintered where the blast hit, raining down into the gorge. The hatchlings squealed in fear, and the dog growled, keeping its body between them and the danger. The human shouted over the wind, "They're trying to force us into a dead end." The dog didn't understand the words, but it understood the tension in his voice. Up ahead, the gorge narrowed even further. The dragon slowed slightly, scanning the path ahead. From somewhere above, a hunter ship dropped lower, blocking the exit. The dog's ears flattened. They were trapped. The parent dragon flared its wings. Landing on a wide rock ledge, the human jumped down, pulling a small metallic box from his pack. "We're making a stand," he said. The dog leapt down beside him, the hatchlings huddling under its belly. The hunters landed their ships on the opposite side of the river. Armored figures spilled out, their glowing visors reflecting the moonlight. Weapons were raised, and their leader stepped forward, his voice sharp and cold. "Hand over the hatchlings, and we'll let you live." The human didn't answer. The dragon bared its teeth, a low growl building in its chest. The dog's growl joined it, deep and fierce. The hatchlings made small, defiant chirps as if they understood the threat. The hunters began to spread out, trying to surround them. The human set the metallic box on the ground and pressed a button. A faint blue barrier shimmered into place between them and the hunters. It wouldn't last long. "Get ready," he muttered. The dog crouched low, muscles tense, eyes locked on the enemy. The first hunter fired, the energy bolt hitting the barrier and sparking violently. The shield rippled but held. The parent dragon reared back, then unleashed a torrent of fire across the gorge. The heat washed over the dog's fur, but it didn't flinch. The hunters ducked behind rocks, some of their armor glowing red from the heat. The human took the moment to grab a blaster from the ground, a weapon dropped by one of the burned hunters, and began firing back. The dog dashed forward, using the smoke and shadows to cross the rocky ground unseen. It leapt onto one hunter, from behind, its teeth sinking into the gap between armor plates. The hunter screamed and fell, his weapon clattering away. The dog grabbed it in its jaws and flung it into the river. Another hunter lunged at the dog, but a blast of fire from the dragon's mouth sent him stumbling back. The human moved closer to the dog, firing over its head to keep the enemies at bay. But the barrier's glow was fading fast. The leader of the hunters saw it and raised his weapon for a final strike. The dog darted forward before he could fire, slamming into his legs. The shot went wild, exploding harmlessly against the gorge wall. The human used the moment to fire directly at the leader's weapon, shattering it in his hands. The dragon roared again, its voice shaking the stone. The remaining hunters hesitated, their courage breaking. Some turned and ran toward their ships. Others fired blindly as they retreated, but the shots went wide. The gorge filled with the sound of beating wings as the hunters' ships lifted off. The human lowered his weapon slowly, breathing hard. The dog returned to the hatchlings, licking their heads as they chirped in relief. The parent dragon lowered its massive head to the ground, touching its snout gently to the dog's fur. It was a gesture of gratitude. The human smiled faintly at the sight. "I think it knows," he said softly. The dog didn't understand the words, but it understood the feeling for the first time in its life. It wasn't just surviving, it was protecting something that mattered. But as the echoes of the hunters faded into the distance, a deep rumble came from far down the gorge. The human's smile vanished. "That wasn't the last of them," he said. The parent dragon lifted its head sharply, its eyes narrowing. The dog glanced at the hatchlings, still safe for now, and then back at the darkness ahead. Whatever was coming, it was bigger than hunters. And the fight to keep the hatchlings alive wasn't over yet. The rumble in the gorge grew louder, deeper, and more uneven. It wasn't the steady hum of engines or the pounding of footsteps. It was the grinding roar of something alive, something ancient. The parent dragon stepped forward, wings lifting slightly as if to shield the dog and hatchlings. The human's eyes swept the darkness ahead, his grip tightening on the stolen blaster. The dog stood firm in front of the hatchlings, its muscles coiled, its breath slow and steady. From the far shadows a shape began to emerge. It was massive, even larger than the parent dragon. Its body was covered in dark, jagged scales that seemed to drink in the moonlight. Its eyes glowed faintly, but not with warmth. They glowed with hunger. The human muttered under his breath, "That's a gorge breaker." The dog didn't know what those words meant, but it understood danger when it saw it. The creature's claws scraped against the rock, sending sparks into the air. The hatchlings chirped in fear, pressing tighter into the dog's fur. The parent dragon roared, the sound echoing through the gorge like rolling thunder. The gorge breaker roared back, the force of it making stones tumble from the cliffs. Then, without warning, it charged. Parent dragon met it head-on. The impact shook the ground, claws raking against scales, teeth snapping in the air. The human shouted to the dog, motioning toward a narrow side path in the gorge wall. "Get them out," he yelled. The dog didn't hesitate. It nudged the hatchlings forward, barking sharply to make them move. The small ones scrambled up the path, their claws scraping stone. The dog followed close, its ears catching every sound of the battle. Below, halfway up, a chunk of rock broke loose, sending one of the hatchlings sliding back toward the edge. The dog lunged, grabbing the small dragon gently by the neck and pulling it back to safety. The hatchling gave a soft, grateful chirp before hurrying after its siblings. At the top of the path, the ground leveled out into an open plateau. The dog herded the hatchlings into a circle of boulders, a small space where they would be hidden. From the fight below, the human appeared moments later, climbing fast, his face streaked with dust. "Stay with them," he told the dog before turning back to the edge. The dog stayed close to the hatchlings, but it could see the battle below. The parent dragon was struggling now. The gorge breaker was stronger and seemed almost tireless. Every blow shook the earth, every roar carried the threat of finality. The human looked down, then at the dog. "There's one way to end this," he said, pulling a small cylindrical device from his belt. He explained quickly. This was an energy disruptor, strong enough to stun the gorge breaker for a few moments, but it had to be placed directly under its chest. The dog's eyes locked on his. The man hesitated for a heartbeat. then crouched and strapped the device to the dog's collar. "You're faster than me," he said quietly. The dog gave a low bark as if it understood. Without waiting, the dog bounded down the rocky slope, weaving between boulders until it reached the fight. The parent dragon saw it and shifted slightly, creating just enough space for the dog to dart in. The gorge breaker's head swung toward the movement, its teeth flashing in the dim light. The dog dodged to the side, leaping onto a low rock. In one burst of speed, it dove under the massive creature's body. The moment its chest passed over, the dog rolled, slamming the device into the dirt. A sharp beep sounded, and then a pulse of blue light exploded outward. The gorge breaker let out a strangled roar, its limbs locking for a moment. The parent dragon didn't waste the chance. With a single, devastating strike, it knocked the creature back into the cliff wall. The gorge breaker slid down, unconscious. The dog scrambled back, its chest heaving, its paws raw from the stone. The human rushed down, pulling the dog into his arms for a brief second before checking the hatchlings. They were safe, their eyes wide but calm now. The parent dragon turned toward the dog, lowering its massive head until its eyes were level with the small stray. It gave a deep, rumbling sound. Not a roar, but something softer. The hatchlings broke from their hiding place and ran to their parent, chirping wildly. But they also paused to nuzzle the dog, their scales warm against its fur. The human smiled, his voice low. "They're thanking you." By the time the sun began to rise over the gorge, the hunters were gone. The gorge breaker was still unconscious, and the dragons were ready to leave. The parent looked at the human, then at the dog. It gave a slow nod, a gesture of trust. Then, in a move that stunned the man, the dragon extended one wing toward the dog, inviting it to climb. The dog hesitated, glancing back at the human. The man knelt and scratched behind its ear. "Go on," he said softly. "They're your family now." The dog climbed onto the dragon's back beside the hatchlings. With one powerful beat of its wings, the dragon rose into the brightening sky. The human watched until they vanished into the clouds. And from that day forward, the colony no longer spoke of the stray dog everyone forgot. They spoke of the hero that saved 3 alien dragon babies and earned a place among the stars. The human stayed crouched for a long moment, watching the stray dog and the 3 tiny dragons. The dog didn't blink, its body stiff, ready to fight if the man made a wrong move. But instead of stepping closer, the man slowly reached into his pack and pulled out a small pouch. From it, he poured a few pieces of dried meat onto the ground, then stepped back. The smell drifted through the air, rich and warm. The dog's stomach twisted with hunger, but it didn't move. Instead, one of the babies waddled forward, sniffing the strange food. The dog gave a low bark, warning it to be careful. The human smiled faintly, his eyes soft. "I don't think you're from here either," he said quietly, his gaze moving between the dragons and the dog. The sun was sinking lower, painting the rocks with long shadows. The air was cooling again, and the wind carried the faint cry of a distant predator. The human looked around, his brow tightening. "You can't stay here," he said, his voice more urgent. The dog didn't understand the words, but it caught the tone. Danger was close. The man stood in motion toward the path that led deeper into the hills. He pointed at the babies, then at himself, then toward the path again. The dog hesitated, torn between distrust and the instinct to protect. Finally, it barked once and nudged the nearest dragonling forward. The babies began to follow, their little claws clicking on the stone. The human walked ahead, keeping his steps slow, glancing back often. The path wound through narrow ridges and dry stream beds. Loose stones slid under their feet and claws, making the journey slow. The dog stayed close to the babies, its head constantly turning. The human stopped often, listening. Once, they heard a distant roar, not the same predator from before, but something heavier. The babies pressed close together, their eyes wide and shimmering. The dog growled softly, warning whatever it was to stay away. By the time the sun touched the horizon, they had reached a rocky overhang. Beneath it was a small cave, its entrance hidden by a curtain of dried vines. The human pushed them aside and motioned for the dog and dragons to enter. Inside it was cool and dry, with walls that blocked the wind. The dog sniffed every corner before letting the baby settle down. The human set his pack on the ground and began pulling out more food, small fruits, strips of meat, and a bottle of water. He placed them in front of the dragons, who sniffed cautiously before nibbling. The dog ate only after they had their fill. Still keeping one eye on the man, night fell quickly, the outside world turning dark and silent except for the sigh of the wind. The human lit a small lamp, its glow soft and steady. He sat near the cave's entrance, listening. For a while, the only sounds were the quiet munching of the dragons and the slow breathing of the dog. Then, faintly, came the crunch of footsteps. Over loose stone, the human stiffened. The dog lifted its head, ears forward, growl low and deep. The footsteps grew closer, not one set, but many. Voices followed, sharp and quick, speaking in a language the dog didn't understand. The human's eyes narrowed. "They found us," he whispered. The dog could smell them now, strange, metallic, and bitter. It moved in front of the babies, its fur standing on end. The human quietly pushed the lamp out, plunging the cave into darkness. Outside, the footsteps stopped. For a moment, all was silent. Then a beam of light sliced through the vines, sweeping across the cave floor. One of the babies let out a small frightened chirp. The light froze. Voices called out, louder this time. The dog barked sharply, its voice echoing in the stone walls. The human grabbed his pack and slung it over his shoulder. "Come on," he hissed. He moved to the back of the cave, where a narrow gap in the rock led into a hidden tunnel. The dog herded the babies toward it, nipping gently at their tails to keep them moving. The tunnel was tight and rough, forcing them to move in single file. Behind them, heavy boots crashed into the cave. The sound of metal clanging against rock followed. A shout rang out, and then a strange hiss. The smell of burned stone filled the air. The human didn't look back, urging them faster. The dog stayed at the rear, glancing over its shoulder. Through the dim light, it saw shapes entering the tunnel. Tall, armored figures with glowing visors. One of them raised a weapon. The dog barked again, loud and fierce, making the dragons rush forward faster. It knew it couldn't fight them here, but it could slow them down. They emerged from the tunnel into a steep ravine lit by the pale light of the moons. The human pointed toward a cluster of boulders ahead. The dog pushed the babies toward them, shielding them from view. The man dropped to one knee, pulling out a small device. A loud crack echoed through the ravine as part of the tunnel collapsed behind them, sealing the hunters inside, at least for now. The dog panted hard, its heart racing. The human looked at it, his face lit by the cold moonlight. "That was close," he said. But the dog wasn't thinking about the danger they'd escaped. It was thinking about the danger still coming, because deep in the night air, beyond the sound of falling rocks, there was another sound, the distant, unmistakable roar of something much bigger than the hunters, and it was getting closer. The roar rolled through the ravine like thunder. It was deep, long, and so powerful that even the rocks seemed to vibrate. The stray dog froze, its ears flat. The three tiny dragons pressed themselves under the nearest boulder, their small bodies trembling. The human glanced toward the sound, his eyes narrowing. "That's not a hunter," he whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. "It's something far worse." The night air felt heavier now, carrying the smell of hot stone and scorched air. The man slung his pack over one shoulder and motioned for the dog to move the babies. They hurried along the edge of the ravine, staying close to the shadows. The dog's paws made no sound, but the man's boots scraped softly against the stone. The roar came again, this time followed by the slow, echoing thump of enormous footsteps. Somewhere in the darkness, rocks tumbled, and a boulder split apart with a sharp crack. They climbed out of the ravine into a narrow canyon. The moonlight caught the edges of the stone walls, painting them silver. Here, the air was still, but the sense of danger was stronger than ever. The human stopped at a bend, crouched, and pulled something from his belt, a small scanner, its screen glowing faint blue. He frowned at whatever it showed, then looked down at the dragons huddled against the dog. "They're tracking the hatchlings," he murmured. "They'll send everything they have to take them." The dog didn't understand the words, but it understood the urgency in his voice. The man reached into his pack and pulled out a folded blanket. He gently wrapped the 3 babies together so they could be carried at once. The dog stayed close, brushing its shoulder against the man's leg as if to say, "Don't drop them." With the dragons secured, they moved faster, slipping between towering rock formations. The path twisted and narrowed, the walls closing in until they could barely fit. The canyon opened suddenly into a flat stretch of ground, where the remains of an old mining station lay in ruin. Metal walls half buried in sand, twisted beams pointing toward the stars. The man's eyes scanned the wreckage. "This could work," he said quietly. He led them inside what had once been a storage room, the ceiling half collapsed but still offering shelter. The dog sniffed every corner, its tail low but wagging slightly when it found no threat. They settled in the shadows. The man unwrapped the babies and offered them water from a small flask. They drank eagerly, their little wings fluttering as the warmth returned to them. The dog lay beside them, resting, its head over their small bodies. The man sat opposite, leaning against a broken wall. For a moment, there was silence. Then the man spoke, his voice softer now. "I used to work for a team that studied these creatures," he said. "They're rare, almost no one has seen them up close, not without losing their life." He looked at the dog with a faint, almost puzzled smile. "You're not just guarding them, you're protecting them like they're yours." The dog tilted its head, not understanding the words, but catching the warmth in the man's tone. The babies let out tiny chirps, the sound filling the quiet room. The man's smile faded after a moment. "Those hunters, they don't just want to sell them," he said, his gaze darkening. "They'll use them, train them for war." The dog's ears twitched. It didn't know what war meant, but it understood the man's voice carried warning. Suddenly, a loud clang echoed from outside. The man was on his feet instantly. The dog leapt up, standing over the babies, teeth bared. Another clang followed. Then footsteps, slow, deliberate, too heavy to be human. The man grabbed the metal rod from the floor, holding it like a weapon. He motioned for the dog to keep the babies hidden. From the darkness outside, a shadow began to form. It was massive, with a long neck and glowing eyes that cut through the night. The dog's fur rose. This was no hunter. The creature stepped into the broken station, its scaled body filling the doorway. The heat from its breath washed over them. One of the babies let out a high, piercing cry. The giant's head lowered, its eyes locking on the small bundle. The man stepped forward slowly, raising one hand in a calming gesture. The dog, however, stayed in place, ready to fight if it needed to. The giant let out a low rumble that shook the air. Then, to the dog's surprise, it lowered itself to the ground. Resting its head near the babies, the little dragons chirped again.